the 1800s energy system that challenges everything we know. In December 2025, a team of industrial archaeologists investigating the ruins of an abandoned textile factory in Manchester, England, made a discovery that is forcing a complete reassessment of our understanding of 19th century electricity and technology history. Inside a basement, sealed for over 140 years, they found a power generation and distribution system that shouldn't have existed at that time, not just a few temporally misplaced components. A complete functional system, with engineering principles that supposedly weren't developed until decades later. This isn't a story of aliens or impossible technology. It's a much more fascinating story about how gaps in historical records, destruction of documents, and assumptions about linear progress can obscure real innovations that were lost, forgotten, or deliberately suppressed. And when you start investigating, you discover that Manchester is no isolated case. There is scattered, fragmented, but consistent evidence of 19th century power systems that were far more advanced than history books suggest. Let's start with what was specifically found. The factory in question, Ashworth Mill, operated from 1840 until its abrupt closure in 1883. Official records state that the factory used conventional steam power, like all textile factories of the Victorian era. But in the sealed basement, the team found something different: a system of heavy-gauge copper cables, connecting multiple generators to distribution panels with manual switches, carbon filament lamps in standardized sockets, and primitive but functional transformers for adjusting voltages. Carbon analysis and construction style confirm everything dates from the mid-19th century, but this creates a problem. Commercially viable incandescent lamps did not exist until 1879, when Edison and Swan independently developed them. Standardized electricity distribution did not begin until 1882 with Edison's Pearl Street Station. Transformers were not patented until 1885. So how did a factory in the 1860s or 1870s have a system that incorporated all these technologies? The conventional answer would be that the dating is wrong or the evidence has been misinterpreted. But multiple independent dating methods confirm the period, and there's more. In the Manchester archives, researchers found fragmented references in personal diaries of factory workers mentioning perpetual flameless light as early as 1867. There are records of copper wire purchases in quantities vastly exceeding what would have been needed for telegraphy, a common use of electricity at the time. And there are obscure British patents from the 1850s and 1860s for electric lighting apparatus and electric motive power systems that were never widely publicized or commercially implemented, or so we thought. What really happened? How did such advanced technology exist and then disappear from mainstream records? And more importantly, what else might be hidden in sealed basements and forgotten archives about real 19th century technological capabilities? What exactly was found in Manchester? To understand the magnitude of this discovery, we need to be specific about what industrial archaeologists found in December 2025 and why each component is significant. The system was remarkably preserved because the basement had been sealed when part of the factory collapsed in 1883, creating a relatively protected environment from moisture and disturbance. First component, generators. There are 3 direct current generators, each approximately the size of a large barrel, with a design that shows a sophisticated understanding of electromagnetic induction. They use copper coils wound around iron cores, a design that appears to derive from Michael Faraday's principles, but implemented in ways that do not appear in published technical literature of the period. Metallurgical analysis of the copper and iron confirms mid-19th century production. Insulation techniques use lacquer and natural materials consistent with the technology of the time. There is nothing annually modern about these generators. They are genuinely Victorian, but their existence in a functional configuration of multiple units for power distribution is anachronistic. Second component, distribution system. There is a network of heavy-gauge copper cables, much heavier than typical telegraph wires, running through porcelain conduits, along the basement walls and ceiling. Cables connect to distribution panels with large manual switches made of brass and insulating materials. The design of these panels shows a practical understanding of parallel circuits and the need for current flow control. There are even primitive fuses, strips of metal designed to melt and break the circuit if the current becomes too high. This is sophisticated electrical safety engineering that supposedly wasn't standard until decades later. Third component, light bulbs. This is perhaps the most impressive aspect. There are approximately 40 light bulb sockets mounted throughout the area, and several intact bulbs still in their sockets. The bulbs use carbon filaments in evacuated glass bulbs. Glass analysis shows glass blowing techniques consistent with the Victorian period. Filaments are made of carbonized bamboo, a technique Edison famously used but didn't invent until 1880, but these Manchester lamps seem to predate that. The lamp bases use a standardized screw system, implying production on some scale, not just unique prototypes. Fourth component, transformers, or similar devices. There are two large units that appear to be primitive transformers, devices for increasing or decreasing voltage. They use copper coils on laminated iron core. The transformer principle was theoretically established, but practical application in power systems was not common until the 1880s. The existence of these devices in systems from the 1860s or 1870s suggests practical knowledge of alternating current or at least principles of induction that do not appear in published technical records. Fifth component, electric motors. There are two small electric motors, presumably used to drive machines or auxiliary equipment. The motors show a sophisticated design with commutators and brushes. Electric motor technology existed in primitive form in the mid-19th century, but practical application in an industrial setting was rare and not well documented. The presence of motors integrated into a larger power system shows a view of electricity not only as a novelty or illumination, but as a source of mechanical energy. If you're discovering that the history of technology is more complex and full of gaps than simplified narratives suggest, leave a like now. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell for more investigations of lost technologies and alternative history. And if you want to support this type of in-depth research, click the Hypar button below. Your support makes it possible for us to continue exploring these fascinating anomalies. Now let's examine documentary evidence that supports this physical discovery. Documentary evidence. Fragments of forgotten history. The physical discovery in Manchester is extraordinary, but on its own it could be an explainable anomaly or an isolated case of local experimentation that doesn't connect to broader trends. What makes this case truly intriguing and historically significant is that when researchers began searching historical archives with a new focus and specific questions, they found documentary fragments that support the existence of advanced electrical systems in the 19th century that simply don't appear in conventional history of technology. Starting with local archives in Manchester, the John Rylands Library contains an extensive collection of personal diaries, letters, and documents from Victorian industrial workers. These materials are generally underutilized because historians focus on important figures and official documents, not on the everyday writings of ordinary workers. But it is precisely in these personal documents that we find the most compelling evidence because authors had no reason to exaggerate or fabricate. Diary entry of James Whitworth, weaving supervisor at Ashworth Mill, March 14, 1867. New electric lights were installed in the spinning room today. They shine with steady, bright clarity without the flickering of gas, flames, or smoke from oil lamps. Mr. Ashworth says it is the future of industrial lighting and that soon every factory will be lit like this. Men marvel at light that has no visible fire. This is not a vague description. It is a specific observation of stable electric lighting, a quality that distinguishes incandescent lamps from electric arcs, which were known but unstable at the time. Letter from Sarah Blackwood, a textile worker, to her sister in Liverpool, dated August 23, 1869. The factory now has wonderful lights powered by electricity that Mr. Ashworth brought from London. There is no flame, no heat to make us sweat even more in the summer, just constant brightness like little suns. They say that machines will also be powered by electricity soon instead of steam belts and pulleys. That would be wonderful. Again, a specific description that differentiates electric lighting from previous methods and anticipates the application of electric motors. These are not just vague references to special lights. They are precise technical descriptions that correspond exactly to what would be expected of an incandescent lighting system. And these are not isolated cases. Researchers have found at least 15 different references to electric lighting at Ashworth Mill in personal documents of different workers throughout 1867 and 1880. Business records provide another crucial line of evidence. Manchester City Archives contains accounting books and business correspondence from many Victorian companies. Ashworth Mill records show significant and consistent purchases of copper wire from Birmingham Copper Works between 1863 and 1878. Quantities are specifically documented in shipping records. Orders for 2 to 3 tons of heavy-gauge copper wire, specification number 8 and number 10 in the notation of the time, several times a year. To put this into perspective, a typical telegraph station that was the primary user of copper wire at the time would use at most a few hundred pounds of wire per year for the entire installation. What was Ashworth Mill doing with quantities 10, 20 times greater repeatedly over 15 years, if not building and maintaining a substantial electrical distribution system and progressively expanding it? There are also payment records in the mill's accounting books listing payments to electrical engineers regularly from 1865 to 1880, a term that was not officially common or standardized until the end of the century when fields of electrical engineering became established in universities. And there are specific payments for maintenance of electrical apparatus, repairs to generator number 2, replacement of electric lamps, 24 units, and similar descriptions that are unambiguous in meaning. Moving beyond Manchester, when researchers began investigating with a new perspective, they found similar evidence elsewhere. The British Patent Office has dozens of obscure patents from the 1850s, 1870s for electrical devices that are rarely mentioned in histories of technology. Patent number 2503 from 1857 by an inventor named William State describes a system of electric lighting using incandescent lamps with carbon filaments in evacuated glass containers. This is 22 years before Edison. The patent includes detailed technical drawings. Why isn't this better known? There is an 1866 patent by John Holmes for a system of distributing electric current using insulated copper conductors and switching devices, which essentially describes a domestic or industrial electrical wiring system. And an 1871 patent by inventor Margaret Knight, best known for inventing the paper bag machine, also patented improvements in electrical generating apparatus that describe a generator design remarkably similar to those found in Manchester. These patents exist. They are documented in official records, but they don't appear in standard history books on electrical technology. Why? Conventional theories and their limitation. When confronted with evidence of advanced 19th century electrical technology that doesn't fit into established chronology, conventional academics offer various explanations. Let's examine them honestly and see where they are satisfactory and where they leave questions unanswered. First theory, non-commercialized prototypes. The explanation is that yes, several inventors experimented with electric lighting and power systems before Edison and others, but these were laboratory prototypes or one-off demonstrations, not commercially implemented functional systems. Problem with this explanation, Ashworth Mill was not a research laboratory. It was a commercial textile factory operating for profit. The system found is not an experimental prototype. It is a full-scale functional installation with multiple generators, dozens of lamps, and distribution infrastructure. And documentary evidence suggests it operated for years, not as a one-off demonstration. Second theory, incorrect dating. Perhaps components found are not actually from the 1860s, 1870s, but from a later period, the 1880s or 1890s, when electrical technology was. Problem: multiple independent dating methods confirm the period. Carbon analysis of organic materials as insulation, metallurgical analysis of copper and iron, building construction style, stratigraphic context of sealed basement, all consistently point to the mid-19th century. And there is contemporary documentary evidence from diaries and business records that cannot be easily dismissed. Third theory, misinterpretation of purpose. Perhaps the system was not for electrical power as we understand it, but for another purpose that we are misinterpreting. Problem: component design is unequivocal. Generators are clearly for generating electrical current. Lamps are clearly incandescent lighting devices. Distribution panels are for controlling the flow of electricity. There is no plausible alternative interpretation that better fits the physical evidence. Fourth theory, deliberate suppression. This is more controversial, but deserves consideration. The theory is that several 19th century electrical innovations were deliberately suppressed or marginalized for economic or political reasons. Perhaps inventors who lacked the right connections or capital were prevented from commercializing their innovations. Perhaps established companies in gaslighting or steam power saw electricity as a threat and used influence to delay its adoption. There are historical precedents for this, but direct evidence of organized conspiracy is scarce. More likely, a combination of factors, lack of capital, institutional resistance, fragmentation of knowledge, resulted in some innovations not being widely adopted or documented. Fifth theory, loss of records. A great deal of historical documentation has been lost through fires, wars, and neglect. Perhaps much more electrical experimentation was happening in the 19th century than we know simply because records did not survive. This is a partially plausible explanation. but it does not fully explain why functional systems like Ashworth Mill did not leave a greater mark on history. If the system operated for years in a commercial factory, there should be more traces in commercial records, local newspapers, and personal memoirs. Global connections. Evidence from other countries. Manchester is not a unique case when you start looking systematically. When researchers begin investigating with an open mind to the possibility that 19th century electrical technology was more advanced and widespread than conventional history suggests, they find fragmented but consistent evidence of advanced electrical systems in multiple countries around the world. These independent findings suggest that there was far more experimentation and practical implementation of electrical technology happening globally than simplified history, centered on a few famous inventors. Acknowledge it. The United States offers multiple intriguing examples. In 2023, during extensive renovation of a historic building in downtown Philadelphia, builders found electrical wiring hidden within walls that subsequent analysis showed to date back to the 1870s, a full decade before official commercial electrical implementation in the city began in the 1880s. Wiring used fabric and gutta percha insulation consistent with the early Victorian period, and the installation pattern showed a planned system, not later modification. There are also, fascinating references in New York newspapers from 1876 to private residences illuminated by permanent electric light in neighborhoods like Greenwich Village, years before Edison's Pearl Street Station in 1882, which is credited as the first commercial power plant. A specific article in the New York Herald of September 12, 1876, describes a visit to the residence of an unnamed inventor, where every house shines with electric light from 50 incandescent lamps powered by a generator in the basement. France has its own set of evidence. Detailed archives of the 1867 Universal Exposition in Paris contain visitor descriptions of electric lighting that go far beyond official demonstrations documented in exhibition catalogs. Multiple visitors in letters and diaries mention seeing entire factories illuminated by electric light without gas, and large engines powered by electric current instead of steam in industrial pavilions, especially in the British and German pavilion. French historian Dr. Michel Dubois, a specialist in 19th century industrial history, found references in French regional newspapers from the 1870s to at least 6 factories in the Lyon region using electric motive power and permanent lighting by electricity. Germany presents a particularly well-documented but largely ignored case. German inventor Heinrich Goebel, who emigrated to New York and worked as a watchmaker, consistently claimed to have developed functional incandescent lamps as early as 1854, a full 25 years before Edison. There is sworn testimony from multiple people who claim to have seen his lamps working in his workshop and residence in the 1850s. The case went to federal court in 1893 in a patent dispute between Edison and competitors, with several witnesses under oath confirming the veracity of Goebel's lamps decades earlier. The court found the evidence credible enough to question some of Edison's broad patent claims. Russia contributes evidence that the development of electrical technology was truly global. Russian inventor Pavel Yablochkov developed his famous electric candle for street lighting in the 1870s, which was used extensively in Paris, London, and other European cities before Edison's incandescent light bulbs became commercially available. Yablochkov's system is historically recognized but generally treated in history books as a minor parallel development or technological dead end, not as an indication that the electrical technology ecosystem was much richer and more diverse than the Edison-centered narrative suggests. Australia, despite being geographically remote and having a small population in the 19th century, also shows surprisingly early evidence of electrical technology. Sydney municipal records from 1878 specifically mention an electrically lit theater for nighttime performances. And there are verified photographs from 1879 showing electric light poles installed on certain Sydney streets, contemporary with, or even preceding, similar implementations in many more famous American and European cities. What these global cases suggest is that electrical technology in the 19th century was more widespread and varied than the simplified story of Edison invented the light bulb in 1879, and everything followed from there allows. There were multiple inventors in multiple countries, working on similar problems, and sometimes arriving at solutions that worked but did not become commercially dominant or were not well documented. Why technologies have been forgotten? If these advanced electrical technologies existed in the 19th century, why were they forgotten or marginalized in favor of a simpler narrative focused on a few famous inventors? There are several interconnected reasons. First, industrial consolidation. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw massive consolidation of industries. Large companies absorbed or destroyed smaller competitors. In the electrical industry, companies like General Electric and Westinghouse came to dominate. They had an interest in promoting their own technologies and origin stories. Independent inventors or alternative systems that didn't fit their business model were marginalized. Second, standardization. For electricity to be widely adopted, it needed standardization, common voltages, compatible sockets, uniform safety practices. This standardization process inevitably favored certain technical approaches and left others behind. Experimental or local systems that worked but didn't conform to emerging standards were abandoned. Third, patent protection and legal disputes. There were brutal patent wars in the late 19th century over electrical technology. Companies used litigation to suppress competitors. Inventors lacking the resources for protracted legal battles often gave up or sold patents for a pittance. This resulted in some genuine innovations being buried. Fourth, generational change and loss of knowledge. Technical knowledge, especially in the pre-formal engineering education era, was often transmitted through apprenticeship and hands-on experience. When generations of inventors and engineers died without fully documenting their work or training successors, knowledge was lost. Fifth, survivorship bias in historical records. Documents that survive tend to be from successful and large companies, not from failed ventures or local experiments. This creates a distorted perception that only a few important inventors were working in electrical technology when the reality was a much richer and more diverse ecosystem. Sixth, simplified narratives sell. History, as popularly told, prefers simple narratives of the genius inventor hero creating revolutionary technology. The more complex reality of technological development with multiple contributors, dead ends, and parallel implementations is less appealing to the general public and even to technical education. So history is simplified and nuances are lost. Implications for understanding technological progress. The discovery in Manchester and related evidence have broader implications for how we understand the nature of technological progress. First implication, progress is not linear. We like to think of technology as progressing in a straight line from primitive to advanced, but reality is more complex. There are multiple parallel paths, developments that lead nowhere, technologies that are developed, forgotten, and rediscovered. The history of technology is more like a bush with many branches than a straight line. Second implication, innovation is not just about invention, but about implementation. Multiple people can invent similar technology independently, but success depends on factors beyond technical merit. Capital, connections, timing, luck. Some good technologies fail, not because they are inferior, but because they lack resources or the right market conditions. Third implication, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because something doesn't appear in standard history books doesn't mean it didn't happen. Historical records are incomplete and biased. There is much more happening in any historical period than we manage to capture in surviving documents. Fourth implication, we need to be open to revising history based on new evidence. When discovered, as Manchester emerges, it shouldn't simply be dismissed because it doesn't fit into established narratives. It should motivate deeper investigation and possibly a revision of accepted chronologies. Fifth implication, knowledge can be lost and recovered. Humanity doesn't always progress in understanding. Sometimes knowledge is lost through war, social collapse, or simply neglect, and needs to be rediscovered. This should make us humble about presuming that we always know more than past generations. What else might be hidden? If a sophisticated electrical system was operating in Manchester in the 1860s, 1870s, and was essentially forgotten for 140 years, what other technologies or capabilities might be hidden in sealed basements, uncatalogued archives, or lost memories? Roman concrete that cured underwater and grew stronger over time. The exact formulation was lost and has only been partially reproduced in recent years. Damascus, steel with characteristic patterns and superior properties. Manufacturing techniques were lost for centuries. Greek fire, a Byzantine incendiary weapon that burned in water. The exact composition remains unknown. These are recognized examples of lost technical knowledge. The Manchester discovery suggests there may be much more, especially in relatively recent periods like the 19th century, where we assume we have complete records but clearly do not. What other Victorian innovations were experimented with, worked on a limited scale, but left no mark on major records? What inventions were developed but suppressed by competitors? What technical capabilities were lost when specific inventors died without fully documenting their work? Lessons for the present and the future. The history of Manchester's electrical system and related evidence of forgotten 19th century advanced electrical technology offers profound and practical lessons for how we think about technology, innovation, and progress in our own time. These are not merely historical curiosities, but insights applicable today. First fundamental lesson: documenting knowledge thoroughly is absolutely critical and cannot be taken for granted. Much technical knowledge, especially tacit practical knowledge of how to actually do things and make them work well, is held in the heads of individual practitioners and in the practices of working communities, and can be extraordinarily easily lost when those people retire or pass away or when communities disperse. We need deliberate, conscious, and well-funded efforts to document not only abstract principles, but concrete practices, tricks of the trade, implicit knowledge that experts use but may not even realize they possess. Second lesson: diversity of technological approaches is valuable and must be preserved against pressures for premature standardization. Technology should not be monopolized by a few large companies or single paths of development. Distributed experimentation, alternative approaches, and multiple parallel paths maintain a vibrant, adaptable, and resilient innovation ecosystem against the failures of any particular approach. Third lesson: our understanding of history, even recent history, is always incomplete and provisional. We must remain intellectually humble and open to revising firmly established understandings based on new evidence that will inevitably emerge. The arrogance of presuming that we know completely and definitively what happened in the past blinds us to possibilities and makes us resistant to learning from evidence that doesn't fit comfortable narratives. Fourth crucial lesson: commercial success and market dominance are not the only or even best measures of technological value or merit. Technologies that did not become commercially dominant for reasons of timing, capital, political connections, or luck may still have substantial technical merit and important lessons to teach future generations. History is written by winners, but winners are not necessarily technically superior. Fifth lesson: the need to preserve the diversity of historical records. Archives of large corporations and official government documents are important, but not sufficient. Personal documents, small business records, local publications, knowledge from communities of practice, all contain vital information that can be lost if not deliberately preserved. If this exploration of forgotten 19th century electrical technology has expanded your understanding of how history is more complex than simple narratives suggest, please leave a like. Subscribe to the channel for more investigations of lost technologies and historical anomalies. Click on the video appearing on the screen to continue exploring mysteries of our technological past. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next video.